A roll call.
Commissioner McPhail.
Here.
Commissioner Mead.
Present.
Commissioner Lee.
Present.
And Chair Malakoff.
Present. And now we will we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda finalization. Ms. Schultz, do we have any clarifications or?
Just one clarification, Mr. Chairman. As you see on the agenda that's being displayed, it does say that it's the Cannabis Task Force. There's a glitch in the system right now, which signifies that in error. All of the meetings read that right now. But yes, just to confirm, and as you announced, this is a Planning Commission meeting. It's a regular Planning Commission meeting. Thank you.
Public comments.
Agenda, public comments. The public is invited to address the Planning Commission on any matter not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on an agenda item, please wait to be recognized under that item. Except for special circumstances, the Brown Act prohibits the Planning Commission or staff from responding or taking action on any comments made by the public unless it pertains to an item that appears on the agenda. All speakers should give their name and city of residence. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. I don't have any speaker forms now. Do we have any for a non-agenda item?
Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda?
And if anybody wants to speak on the agenda item, please fill out a speaker card and we'll definitely want to hear from you.
And the speaker slips, just to clarify, the speaker slips are available on the table right on the outside of this room.
And if you change your mind, that's okay too. You can come up to the lectern and give your name and city of residence. Approval of minutes. On the approval of the October 2nd and October 16th minutes, are there any requests to speak from the public on this item? I don't see any comments. Are there any corrections or additions on the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, there's just one correction on each set of minutes. Commissioner Bedard is reflected as a voting member, so we'll correct that in the final minutes.
Yeah, I had a draft of the final minutes on here, so that would need to be reflected in the ones that that I was given. Do I have a motion and or a second to approve the minutes?
Move to approve the minutes as amended.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. Oh, we were waiting for the screen.
Of course, my machine's not working.
I'm not getting the vote.
The voting
results. I
system's not
apologize.
working.
I'm not sure why that is, but we'll do a roll call vote for
Okay.
this. Thank you. Commissioner McPhail.
Aye.
Commissioner Mead.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
And Chair Malakoff.
That was me. Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Our first non-public hearing is a report on cannabis location regulations by Mr. Rocha, and we will have the report, and then we'll have time for public comment and then commission discussion, and we can get started. Mr. Rocha, the dais is yours.
Can they see the presentation? Oh. right. Good evening, Commissioners, Chair Malakoff and Vice Chair Lee. My name is Manuel Rocha, Assistant Planner here at the City of Cathedral City. Today I bring before you a presentation on the city's cannabis locational regulations as requested by the Planning Commission. All right, so on October 25th, 2017, two ordinances were adopted and codified into the Cathedral City Municipal Code, establishing a comprehensive set of regulations allowing adult-use cannabis businesses to operate within the city. These regulations were created to provide the public with a clear understanding of the process for obtaining city approval to operate a cannabis business in the city, in addition to the rules to operate a cannabis business. Chapter 5.88 was established to provide for regulation and licensing of medicinal and adult use cannabis businesses throughout the city in conformance with applicable state and local laws and regulations pertaining to medical and adult use cannabis. Chapter 9.108 was established with the purpose of regulating cannabis business land uses as permitted by Section 26200 of the California Business and Professional Code in a manner designated to minimize negative impacts on the city and neighboring uses and promote the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of residents and businesses within the city. The Cannabis Task Force was established on January 27, 2021, and consists of 7 members: the city manager, who serves as the chair of the task force, 3 owners or managers of cannabis businesses located within the city, and 3 residents of the city. The Cannabis Task Force was created with the purpose of ensuring that cannabis businesses in Cathedral City are conducted in a safe and orderly manner to protect the welfare of medical cannabis patients, primary caregivers, adult users, and the community. Main responsibilities of the task force include being an advisory body to the City Council, providing recommendations to the City Council related to any cannabis issues within the city. Additionally, the task force may propose amendments to any cannabis-related rules or regulations. The city allows for 5 types of cannabis businesses: dispensaries, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and testing laboratories. These uses are permitted solely in specified zoning districts with the approval of a conditional use permit, with the exception being testing laboratories, which are allowed by right in certain zones. The table provided shows where each cannabis business type is permitted with the approval of a CUP for Chapter 9.108. A cannabis business zoning map was also provided in the attachments of the staff report, which shows the zoning areas within the city where cannabis is conditionally permitted. In addition to the zoning requirements, Section 9.108.070 of the Municipal Code establishes locational requirements for cannabis dispensaries, cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution uses. It further mandates that a CUP should not be approved for a cannabis business unless it meets the required locational requirements applicable to the type of cannabis business proposed. As shown on the chart here, no dispensary shall be located within 600 feet from a school, daycare center, or youth center, within 250 feet from a residential zone, or within 200 feet from the resort residential zone. Just to clarify, within 200 feet from the resort residential zone if the dispensary includes an area for the outdoor consumption of cannabis and cannabis products pursuant to Section 5.88.070J. No cultivation, manufacturing, or distribution use shall be located within 600 feet from a school, daycare center, or youth center, or within 300 feet from a residential zone. Distances pertaining to the setbacks are measured in a straight line without regard to intervening structures or topography from the nearest point of the building or structure in which the cannabis business is located from the residential, school, daycare, and youth center's setback requirements, or until the city limit is reached. Setbacks from residential zones are measured to the nearest point of any legally permitted structure located in a residential zone, or if there is land within a residential zone with no legally permitted structure, the measurement shall be to the nearest property line unless the property line is within the public right-of-way. There are no limits on the number of cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and testing laboratories within the city. However, there is a limit on dispensaries. Section 9.108.030 defines excessive concentration as more than 20 dispensaries being approved to operate south of Interstate 10. Currently, there are 9 operating dispensaries south of Interstate 10. While there are concerns of overconcentration of cannabis uses in particular areas within the city, as previously mentioned by Commissioner McPhail, establishing zoning requirements do not otherwise address overconcentration of uses within the proximity of one another, as they solely identify the zone districts where the cannabis uses are permitted. The city currently has 48 operating cannabis licenses and 26 non-operating cannabis licenses for a total of 74 cannabis licenses. Here you will see a table showing how the cannabis licenses are broken up. A map was also provided as an attachment with the staff report showing the existing cannabis business locations within the city. Per section 5.88.040 of the Municipal Code, as of November 23rd, 2016, the local license authority has not been permitted to accept applications for dispensaries proposed to be located south of Interstate 10. However, licensing does allow for the transfer of licenses to other properties in accordance with the Municipal Code. In addition to any other conditions of approval the Planning Commission determines are appropriate, each CUP includes applicable conditions of approval listed in section 5.88.065 and 9.108.080 of the Municipal Code. Section 5.88.065 establishes operational requirements for cannabis uses, including background checks, age restrictions, on-site signage, advertising, waste disposals, record keeping, and any other additional requirements. A specific example would include the operational requirements for background checks. Per section 5.88.065D, prior to commencing any work with the cannabis business, any individual who will work with a licensed premises or have access to any cannabis or cannabis products must submit a background check that demonstrates they are of good moral character and receive an identification card from the city. Another example would be the security requirement, which states that cannabis businesses are required to be equipped with a video surveillance system that includes security cameras and provide adequate and sufficient coverage of the facility. In addition, they must provide an interior and exterior alarm system installed on all perimeter entry points and perimeter windows, operated and monitored by a security company. These are just a few of the examples that are provided within that code, section of the code. Section 9.108.080 establishes standard operating conditions of approval for cannabis uses pertaining to general requirements and operational requirements, such as odor control, security, and lighting. In addition, there are specific conditions of approval that are associated with each cannabis business use. For example, a general condition of approval for all cannabis uses listed in the municipal code, in that section of the municipal code is for all cannabis uses to provide odor absorbing ventilation and exhaust systems so that odor generated inside the cannabis business is not detected outside, or any other areas available for common use by the tenants or public. However, as mentioned, there are also specific conditions of approval for specific cannabis uses. For example, all distribution sites shall store all cannabis and cannabis products in a locked safe room, safe, or vault, and in a manner to prevent diversion, theft, or loss. This is a condition that's specifically for distribution sites. The conditions of approval listed in this section are included in each conditional use permit approval. Before final approval, these conditions and others, including security camera installation, exterior lighting, are verified by a planner. That is all I have for my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Okay, Mr. McPhail, do you want to start?
We go before the public, or?
I think we go before the public, and then the public will have a chance to make their points.
Thank you, Mr. Rocha, for the presentation. It was quite informative for me as a new commissioner and a new resident as well. And yeah, I'm the guilty party who wanted to find out a bit more about this particular aspect of our work and what if anything, we can do as these new applicants come up. What are our boundaries of what we can and cannot do. And I have a few questions just to walk us through. First of all, you mentioned that there's 20 dispensaries are allowed, and that we have currently 9 in operation. Do we know why we came up with 20 and not 25 or 18 or 12, or any reasoning that we know of?
Hello? Yes. Hi, I'm Erica Vega, and I'm with the City Attorney's Office, and I actually wrote most of these cannabis ordinances. At the time that that cap was put in place, that's how many conditional use permits existed. And so the number was essentially set to cap it at what was in existence at that time.
The pipeline, yep. So 9 are operational, and then there's 5 non-operating licenses. Do those 5 represent businesses that are in the process of coming online, or what does those 5 non-operational licenses mean?
So from my understanding, the non-operating, and this would probably pertain more of a question for the business license department, but my understanding is non-operating refers to businesses that there's an existing license, but they just did not renew it. So it does exist, it just was not renewed.
So they may have gone out of business. Is that what it might be or could be?
I'd like to add to that, the non-operational licenses are for businesses that could be going through the process, submitting an application through licensing, processing a CUP with the city. They may be under construction, so they're not operating. And so there's a variation of reasons why it's a non-operating license.
Cool. Could we maybe pull up the zoning map, the brightly colored zoning map?
You know what, I don't think I included
we
it in
don't
my
have that.
presentation, but I can bring up the map.
You can pull it up as an attachment on the Granicus.
Yes. Thank you.
I thought you. There we go. Not the green one, the multicolored one.
The multicolored one.
Yeah, not that one.
There you go.
That's it. Yeah. So, there's a table in the presentation about the zoning districts that each of the different types of cannabis business can be located in, like I1, CBB2, and so on. So when we look at the map, for example, it looks like, essentially we have maybe 3 blue parcels in the city. You can't quite see the top right now, that's okay. Can you scroll up a little bit? So I1 is the blue-colored zoning. So it looks like south of I-10, we have those 2 up by I-10, and then we have one other, not parcel, but the zoning area around Perez Road and Bankside Drive and so on. And it looked like those 2 I-1 parcels, just from Google, are undeveloped. There's nothing there. I don't know if there's any infrastructure or anything like that. So I'm just wondering that those 2 I-1 parcels a business can't locate there really, probably because there's no infrastructure for business perhaps. So the reality is, if you scroll south, the only I-1 parcel that is viable is, not parcel, zoning area, is the one around Perez Road, which you've got blown up, that shows that is indeed where the majority of businesses are. And then another zoning, let's see, it might be CBB2 and PCC, I think is where the majority of the other ones are. There's some around Ramon Road, which I think some of the speakers will be talking about. So it just seems like, we have all these different zonings where it could potentially be But in terms of, for example, I-1 zoning, there's really only one area it can be in practicality. So I was just wondering, is there any potential with the other two I-2 to have the ability to, if dispensaries were coming in the future, I really wanted to find out where else they could be located in the city. And it just seems like from the way the zoning goes, is there really isn't much territory other than the Perez Road area. That's really the logical outcome of all our zonings, that's where it's located. That's just a comment more than anything else. And then we have a moratorium south of I-10 that existing businesses are able to open new branches. So they have a license or a permit, but they existing ones can open another facility. Would that count toward the 20, another facility, or is it under one license?
So the city is not currently accepting applications for dispensaries.
Okay.
Say if there is one existing south of I-10, they'd be able to relocate to another location south of I-10, as long as they do meet the locational requirements, of course. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And as you mentioned in the presentation, and it was something we brought up when we did have that applicant come a couple of months ago, and we had a short discussion about it. There's nothing in the regulations about the relative proximity of businesses to each other. It's just simply 20 south of I-10 in these zonings. And I was wondering, what is the process for making those sorts of changes? Is it purely the Cannabis Task Force, the City Council? Do we have any role in it? How do those ideas get formulated if there's interest in formulating them?
Commissioner McDonough, you're referring to like changes to the cannabis code, correct?
Yeah, so we now have a figure of 20. What if we heard from the public, or we thought, hey, maybe would it be possible to say that they can't be within X feet of each other instead of being all located? How would a rule like that get into code or the regulations?
So I'd like to lead the response on that, and others can certainly add to this, but I would say that the Planning Commission is in a unique role in the sense that you are hearing the CUPs. You have a lot of experience reviewing the entitlement applications as they come through, and you may be seeing areas of our code that need some refinement, that may need some change. And, I'll call out the filtration system as one where there may be advancements in the industry that are more current than what our code reflects. So as you're seeing new applications come in and these points come up through the deliberation and the course of discussion on that project, I do think it merits some discussion with the Planning Commission to say, is there a better way of doing business? Is there a better way to regulate cannabis? And I think as we're going to discuss a little bit more, some of the uses that we have, cultivation facilities, are they situated in appropriate zone districts within the city? I think those are discussions that the Planning Commission could have. My recommendation in terms of where this may go, I want to open this up for discussion with the Planning Commission, but what I would suggest is that the Planning Commission have these deliberations and make recommendations to the Cannabis Task Force, which really was appointed to advise the City Council on matters pertaining to cannabis. So I think there's a way for you to apply your firsthand experience, reviewing the CUPs, hearing those cases, really understanding where those potential conflicts may be, and channeling that through the Cannabis Task Force. Our zoning code update that we're about to embark upon, I think that is another lens, that's another opportunity for us to make some of those course corrections and calibrations. It's not to say that we have to wait 2 years. If there are some urgent matters, we might be able to advance those to the Cannabis Task Force sooner, but as well going through the zoning code update, that may be another opportunity for us to amend, perhaps modernize some sections of the code.
That's exactly what I was interested in knowing, like what our role, obviously, the Cannabis Task Force, I keep pointing at Danny, makes recommendations to the City Council, but do they get input from us, for example? And the answer would be yes.
In my opinion, yes, because the Cannabis Task Force doesn't see the CUPs that you see. I think the experiences that you have would be an invaluable input for the Cannabis Task Force.
And the Cannabis Task Force meetings are public meetings that people can go to?
Yes.
Cool. All right, I think that's my questions then.
Commissioner Mead.
Thank you for the great presentation. You mentioned there was a moratorium. I was just curious, what was the reason for the moratorium on new dispensaries?
So it isn't a moratorium, it's actually just a regulation stated in code. I'm not too sure the background of it. Do you
City Attorney.
Yeah, so back when that provision was added to the code, there was just a concern about the volume of dispensaries that were being approved. It was still really early in the life of recreational cannabis in the state of California, and Cathedral City was an early adopter. And so you had a really significant volume of applications coming through. And so that was really the purpose for it.
Okay, so you said that there's no new applications being accepted, but we haven't hit the limit that was, okay, so I just wanted to make sure I understood those numbers. Do the non-operating licenses count towards the total? They do. So could someone theoretically get licenses, this seems kind of crazy, but could someone get licenses and never actually open a dispensary in order to keep out competition?
So the cap isn't on the licenses, it's on the CUPs. So
Okay.
they're two separate track things. So a non-operational business, if they have a conditional use permit, that conditional use permit doesn't just go away because they aren't operational yet or
Okay,
they've
got
shut
it.
down for some reason.
Okay, got it. You mentioned something about good moral character. I was just wondering if you could define what that is in the code. Are we talking about people who have a criminal history, or what does that actually mean?
Yes, unfortunately, I don't have the exact definition, but it wouldn't, the background check, they'd look for any criminal background.
Okay. And then once someone meets the conditions, obviously we have lots of different conditions that they have to meet in order to open. Is there any recheck that happens any set number of years, every 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, anything like that, to make sure they're still complying with the conditions?
This is in reference to the CUP, Commissioner?
Yeah, uh-huh.
So our code enforcement team is wrapping up a program to be able to do ongoing inspections on cannabis uses.
Okay, great, thank you. That's it for me?
But I will add that our fire department does annual inspections
Okay,
on
great.
cannabis.
Thank you, Commissioner Mead. Commissioner Lee.
Yeah, maybe just a couple of comments. As my colleague at the end of the row, they kept pointing at me because I'm actually on the Cannabis Task Force as one of the resident representatives. And so these discussions come up quite frequently in the task force, and I think your suggestion that this body can represent their concerns to the task force then can formulate policy suggestions to the city council is probably the way to do it. I think, funnel it through. The issue about number of licenses comes up each time we meet, really, and one of the issues there is how is the business changing in the valley, not just here. The task force itself has representatives from the industry, typically owners of production or dispensary businesses, and so of course they want to make sure it's a functional business that's working for us. So I think their interests are aligned, and in January we did change, or we didn't. We don't change anything. The city council changes things. But we suggested a change to address that issue of licenses being held over and not being used. And so now they would have to show that they had active business in the previous year, or that license can be taken back. So yeah, I see a lot of synergy between these two bodies, and I think that would be very useful.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. I have a few questions. Some of them, one of the disadvantages of going last is that a lot of your issues get brought up in one way or another. I think that dovetailing on Commissioner McFall's, his comments, in zoning, you want to have a periodic review. Like a good example that outside of cannabis is that signs need to be reviewed every few years. As the technology changes and how it looks on the street frontages and everything. But there's no mechanism for signs unless you set up a committee. And so we already have the committee here. So I'm glad that there's like a central place for the comments to go. So if we review a project, would we be able to take action on the project but send a comment to the Cannabis Task Force saying that we feel that this should be acted on or that this should be changed in the code?
Yes, although I would say that the discussion that we're having tonight is perhaps more impactful in the sense that it's a way to structure or channel those comments in a more meaningful way. And if we need to put this on another agenda so that you all can perhaps coalesce those comments in a more meaningful way, we can do that. But I think providing them a larger amount of comments and structuring that it would be most effective. Referring back to some of the recent projects, Desert Kush is one that comes to my mind. There was substantial debate on the air curtains. For that matter, the applicant didn't want to install the air curtains that are mandated by the code, and I think there is a perception that it's not an effective strategy for dispensaries anymore. So I think that's a comment that has come up recently, and as others have come up through your discussions and deliberations, in my opinion, I think that is the list of suggestions or ideas that perhaps you want to refer to the Cannabis Task Force for deeper deliberations and discussions so that we're not relying on old code language that perhaps needs a refresh or that needs to be updated so that it can be more responsive to the current applications that you're coming in. So maybe you could do it on a case-by-case basis, but I think you'll be more impactful doing this in a more structured way.
I think that would be a good opportunity for us to discuss different issues and then forward them to the Cannabis Task Force. My next question is there still a condition that the conditions of approval must be put onto the construction plans? And I ask that because of all the pushback we get for curtains and filters. And I always ask about that when we have a new applicant, that they know about that and that they have to do that. But when you do your TI or your construction plans, if the second page after the title page is a list of all the conditions of approval, it's kind of a reminder to everybody, this is what you need to do. Do we still have that condition?
Yes, Chair Malikoff, we do still have that condition. We require the applicant to provide the conditions of approval on the construction plans during their plan check submittal.
Okay, and going back to the filters and curtains, is that inspected by the building department or by planning?
So that is inspected by planning during the final inspection.
During the final, you actually go and look for that? Okay. Section 5 of the municipal code pertains to business licenses. But a lot of the items in this are very technical land use issues. Is the cannabis section under Title 5 handled by the Finance Department under business licenses, or is it implemented by Development Services, or do they route it to you for analysis?
It's a combination. So cannabis licensing works hand in hand with planning when it comes to new licenses. And so the business license for the actual business is not signed off on until occupancy is granted. The inspections are done by building, fire, police, planning to ensure compliance with the conditions of the project, security, odor control, security of the cannabis product, where it's going to be stored. All that is done, and the license, the business license, is not issued until all those departments sign off.
Okay, and then my last question is probably an attorney question. Can an active or an inactive cultivation business transfer it to a third party? You know, the way a liquor license can be transferred to another party, the ABC will do their investigation, and then they can have that license. Do we do that?
There's provisions in the code regarding modifications to local licenses, one of which is changes in the ownership. So there is a provision in there that addresses that scenario. But you can't add a new owner to a business with a business license without them going through essentially the same process as if they were applying for a new application, the background check, everything. Changes of ownership that simply delete an owner off are a little bit more streamlined rather than adding a new person.
So the inactive licenses take up a spot on the 20 that are allowed, but if they decided that they wanted to sell it to somebody, they would theoretically have to go through the same process that the first party had to go through to assume that license. So there's really no reason. So you would assume a license only because there's 20 licenses available and you would want to get one of the 20 because after 20 you can't get them anymore. Is that correct?
The cap, the 20 cap is not on the licenses, it's on the conditional use permits. So it's the physical locations. And so the way it was structured was so that when you put a cap on the number of conditional use permits, it still allows businesses to move around, but they have to find a location that already has a conditional use permit on it that either isn't being used or, you know, the current occupant is willing to, you know, vacate, something like that.
So if somebody wants to, if I want to assume, well, I don't want to use me as an example because I wouldn't do it, but if Party A wants to assume Party B's license that already has a CUP that has not expired, then they would have to go through all the provisions of Chapter 5, not the provisions of Chapter 9. But they would still be responsible to implement the conditions of approval from the CUP that they received from Chapter 9.
Correct.
But the things about the ownership would go through Chapter 5.
Correct.
And they'd have to start from scratch on that.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's everything. As always, we always have good discussion from this group. Thank you, everybody.
One more question as
Sure.
a result of our discussion.
Commissioner McPhail.
That came up from Commissioner Lee mentioning in the cannabis task force, you know, there's representatives of the industry, so they get a sense of the regional picture of what's going on in the industry. And I don't know if this is for staff or our commissioner wants to comment. He doesn't need to. I was just wondering if from those discussions, if there's any sense of the regulations in Cathedral City being pretty similar, different, more permissive, less permissive. We have more dispensaries, less dispensaries than other cities. Do you have any sense of that?
Why is everyone looking at me? Yes, it comes up in discussion. Clearly, we're balancing the view of the city with the view of the business owners. We want them to be successful because it generates revenue for the city. So we obviously listen to their statistics and compare with what we have. But yeah, we look at things like, you know, how many dispensaries there are in Palm Springs, for example. And Palm Springs went a different route with their legislation in that they really opened it up and let a lot of dispensaries to be built in their city. And as a result, that changed the dynamics of the business for us as well. So yes, those kinds of considerations come in.
Before we move into public comments, Sandra, for code enforcement, so just so the public understands the process, so you can either make a phone call and speak to a person and put a complaint in over the phone. You can go through the app You can put in a complaint or an issue that way. And then a person can follow up with the code enforcement officer if they choose to find out where they're at on that. Because sometimes it takes time, especially if you issue a citation and then they have 30 days to act, and then before it goes to court and all that, you know, there's a whole process. But sometimes people don't know that there's a whole process. So they can speak to the code enforcement officer on where a certain action is.
Correct.
So that's always open to somebody to do. And
I would suggest the My Cathedral City app as the preferred tool to report a complaint, whether this is on cannabis or anything else. I think that's a tracking mechanism that we prefer for the reporting of code compliance complaints. We also have a code compliance officer that has been dedicated to cannabis more so than others, and Talon Weinman has been responsive to a lot of the odor complaints that we have received recently. So for those in the public that are interested in speaking to a staff member, I would encourage them to either talk to me directly, Justin Gardner, our code compliance manager, or Talon Weinman.
so you're saying it's better to make the phone call than to use the app?
I think the app is a good way to report an issue when there is an issue, but for follow-up on specific issues related to cannabis,
enforcement
reach out to one of the three of us directly.
And you can get that number off the internet to call that department. And just so people know, I think some people think that the app just, you know, does it go into some kind of gray area or something? I know for a fact, just so everybody knows, I report illegal dumping almost once a week, and it gets picked up. So it does get to somebody, and it does get acted on. So the app does work. I was a little dubious when it first started that where it would go, but it works very well, and the illegal dumping within 2 or 3 days is picked up. So that's a good way to get things started, and then you can follow up. Let's have public comment. And
I'm sorry, Chair, could I follow up on that?
yes.
Now you've suggested something to me. In terms of the reporting in the app, I use the app too. Yeah, supermarket carts, those for sure I report on. But I have reported particularly on cannabis odor in a number of places. And usually I get feedback eventually that's, well, usually quite quickly. But it says, you know, we sent someone out and we've dealt with it. But also I hear that it's often almost impossible to trace. The odor can be coming from a number of different places, or even an illegal facility. So how are we doing in terms of dealing with that?
Sure. Ms. Molina mentioned this earlier, and that is we are devising new strategies for cannabis enforcement. And I would say in the last 6 months, we've made a lot of headway. We have engaged with staff and code enforcement departments in other cities, including Palm Springs, Desert Hot Springs. We're looking to learn from their experiences. And I would say that this is a new space for us. We've not been very active with code enforcement in cannabis previously, but we understand that there are issues, there are complaints that need to be resolved, and we are working to do that. With odor in particular, what we have been doing is, for one, you know, I monitor the My Cathedral City app and the complaints. I see those every day. You know, I'm using that, Justin's using that, Talon's using that to understand where we're getting those complaints. We have done hotspot analysis. We have looked at correlating where those complaints are coming from and those businesses that are proximate to it to give us a sense of where those most likely problematic businesses are located so that we can do follow-up specifically with those businesses to ensure that they're operating consistent with the operational standards that are in the code and those conditions of approval. This is still an evolving area for us. We're still working out just how we execute, how we do this, but we are looking to use the tools, the technology that's available to us, and looking to better understand how we can enforce. Yes, you know, odor is subjective. You're right. You know, it's difficult to prove exactly where that odor is coming from, and you know, the quantification of the odor. I think that is somewhat subjective to the individual, but there are issues in the community, and I think we're going to hear some of those. We're very much aware of that, and we're aware of where those are coming from.
Do you have any sense of whether it's a particularly bad problem in our city compared to, say, Palm Springs? Do you have any sort of cross information between the cities of those kinds of problems and how they're dealing with them?
Right now, no. I would say that we are lagging behind, though, in terms of our cannabis enforcement compared to other cities. So I think this is a space where, as we continue to mature, as we continue to identify our best practices and how we can manage projects once they've been entitled, once we've issued that license, once they're operational, how we can continue to conduct that follow-up beyond the annual fire inspections, beyond the annual license renewal. How can code compliance operate in the space to manage those businesses appropriately? That's an area where we're still evolving. We're still working out just how to do that. But other cities are more sophisticated in that space, and I think that's an area where we need to grow.
Okay. And would you say the majority or maybe all of the complaints about cannabis are to do with manufacturing, or do you get complaints from dispensaries and so on?
The complaints that we have are odor complaints related to cultivation.
Okay, yeah. I asked that because we've had this discussion before about the filtration systems for dispensaries, and my understanding is that all the product is now required to be in sealed containers. So it's hermetically sealed, there can't be any odor. So again, this is somewhere that we can be looking at whether or not our code is appropriate for the current business. It may have been appropriate 3 or 4 years ago, but maybe we need to look at revising that kind of thing. And also the placement of businesses, because it may be possible, if we're not getting problems with those businesses, to allow them more flexibility in where they are in the city. Okay, good, thank you.
Now I will open public comment, and I'd like to compliment everybody that showed up to this discussion today and participating in the public process, and compliment you for taking the time to do it. Our first speaker that gave us a card is Reg Trowell of Cathedral City.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair and Commissioners, my name is Reg Trowell. I know I'm limited to 3 minutes. I had a couple of questions, particularly in keeping with Mr. Firestein's last comments and Mr. Roca's presentation. I guess my first question, if I could, and it may not be appropriate for your commission, was in Mr. Roca's presentation, he referenced safe and orderly operation and for patients, adult users, and the community. Is the community the public at large? Is that how I'm understanding that?
We're not allowed to respond directly.
Oh, that's okay.
But what you could do is you can ask your questions, and then staff can get back to you.
That's fine. The second question contingent on that was conditions of approval under your 5.88 and referenced by Mr. Roca in 9.108. Again, he focused on the odor and the abatement of that odor or the non-seepage or escape from the facility. I'm paraphrasing. I'd like to know if he could share with me how you determine that. I've understood Mr. Lee's question, which is exactly what I'm focused on here as to how they determine where. I live next door to the one on Ramon Road, and there's no problem knowing where that's coming from. It's the cultivation plant, which has been referenced by Mr. Firestein, if I pronounce your name correctly. It's a significant issue, but I wanted to know, when are these just, back to my original point there on the safe and orderly operation, is that just a brick and mortar issue where you have to have fences and so on? Or is it inclusive of the odors that are coming out of there? And my focus there, and not to belabor it, is I've done quite a bit of research on this with plants both in the U.S. and in Canada, and people refer to the smell, but it's the makeup of that smell, and it's been studied and corrected in pig farming where there's tremendous odor, where they take certain parts of that, change the chemical makeup of it, and it dissipates. I'm not saying that's universally applied. We sent it through one of our people to your committees, I think. Well, you're nodding. You must know more than I, obviously. So those are my questions. I wanted to know in the first one, for safe and orderly, is that a brick and mortar issue, or is there a litmus test when these plants are put in place as to the safety in terms of the chemical odor escaping from there? That's the first one. And the second part is on the conditions of approval. Your specific reference was the abatement is my term. How do you determine that is being abated? And I know there's discussion around some new filters going in there for the plant on Ramon, but we've kind of heard that quite a ways along. So those are my questions, and if someone can get back to me on that, that'd be tremendous, and I appreciate the time that you've given me. Thank you. Well, last question, is it possible to get a copy of Mr. Roca's presentation? Is that in line? I can give you my contact stuff to save time for your committees. Thank you.
And Ken, if somebody wants to take the agenda packet from the notebook, would they be able to do that? Or does that go somewhere else?
We'll coordinate with the speaker to get him a copy of that
Okay.
presentation.
Yeah, somebody asked that before the meeting. Is there anybody else that would like to speak?
No.
Okay, then, thank you, Mr. Rocha. That was very informative, and thank you, Mr. Firestein, for this map, which is also very enlightening. So,
Yeah, I would like to probably take up Mr. Firestein's offer that maybe at a future meeting, we ponder as we get input and new applications, maybe things that we would like to transmit to the Cannabis Task Force for potential regulation changes that would go on to the City Council. So maybe bring that up formally at a later date.
I think that's something we can do. And if I may respond very briefly and on point to the public comment made to the facility on Ramon Road, they are looking at a pilot system. This is a fogging system that would essentially trap those odor molecules. It is a system that is deployed at landfills and other places like that. That is outside of what is currently contemplated in our code. Our code is very specific on odor filtration systems and air curtains, but they are looking at innovative techniques. They are looking at innovative solutions, and we're currently working with them on a schedule and a time frame to deploy that. I know it's not immediate. This is a pervasive issue in the community. We have been working with them. We have been working with them to make this a priority to deploy this solution. It's something that we don't have direct experience with, but the applicant is willing to do this. They're taking ownership of that odor issue. They understand that as an operator, they need to control the odor at the property line. They're looking to mitigate that. While we can't quantify what odor is, it is still subjective. They are looking at deploying these more innovative techniques that have been used in other communities with cultivation facilities. So I think as we learn from that experience, that may be something for us to report back to the Planning Commission to say that this worked for this particular use. Let's assume that it works. this may be something for us to look at applying to future cultivation CUPs, and to look at perhaps as a code amendment where it's effective in this space. So I wanted to share that with you, just to say that it's not static, it is changing, and we're gaining firsthand experience today with that particular cultivation facility.
Hey, thank you. You can move on from non-public hearing items to discussion on future agenda items. Are there any future agenda items that we need to discuss?
You do have a meeting scheduled for November 20th. We will have a project referred to as the WREN. That is a general plan amendment, a zoning code amendment, and design review. We'll also have our new economic development manager present to give a presentation on our current economic development program and the integration of that with our planning efforts. And last, we will be bringing forward an update on rules and procedures, an amendment to the Planning Commission's bylaws that many of you probably haven't seen, but we're going to bring that back, and that'll also touch on parliamentary procedures. So looking forward to sharing that with you on November 20th.
Are there any comments from my fellow commissioners, or any additional comments? Commissioner, Vice Chair Lee.
Actually, I just want to sort of circle back a bit to the idea of sort of workshopping some of these ideas for the zoning rewrite. I think we've had a number of different areas that have come up in the last couple of years. There was, for example, gas stations, and there have been discussions around things like, should we have restrictions on the number of things like gas stations or storage facilities, self-storage facilities, those kinds of things in specific zones or areas. And I'm wondering how we can capture that information and build some discussion around that too. So that kind of feeds into the cannabis topic, but it's broader than that. And I've spoken before the council, and I've spoken to individual council members, and I know there's a lot of mixed opinion about whether we should even do that. So the other question then is if we feel that as a body, how do we present that to the council? How do we move that forward in terms of policy?
Very briefly on it.
Yes.
I think you have an opportunity tomorrow, as we're talking about the selection of a consultant for the zoning code update. That's our first and probably largest opportunity that we have, in the sense that as they come on board, there is a discovery process for that consultant to understand those issues that this city currently has, so that they understand exactly where we're starting from going through that zoning code update. So I think your question is a good question, and it's a question that perhaps should be raised tomorrow with the interview with the consultant we're bringing in for that. And it's a topic for future discussion with the commission on the zoning code update itself. I think that's an important part of the process, really establishing that foundation and a starting point for the discussion.
There's one other thing that actually is tangential to that, but nonetheless I think important, and we've discussed this again. I think this has come up in meetings. And Dom, for example, gave us a presentation recently which just referenced some developments that are not coming to us, but are happening in the city. Couple of drive-throughs and something else going on near I-10. I don't know if it was north or south, but it's a development there. So we don't officially find out about those as a commission. So what I'm looking at is, can we get to the pipeline of information coming through planning, which may not ever actually become a reality, but when it's at a stage where you figure, it's got a good chance of materializing, can we get, whether it's an email update or just a statement here at meetings telling us what's going on and what's coming through?
Yes, we talked about this. I have not updated Sandra, but I think having a notification to the commission that there is a new pending application is something that we can start doing.
Great, thank you.
You know, one of the, you and I had discussed previously about having more interaction with some of the other planning commissions, and one thing the city of La Quinta's Planning Commission does is, and I've never checked out their agenda per se, but they have a report on staff actions that they took. Like, I don't think that they report back every sign that they approve, but I think like the administrative design reviews, their equivalent of it, get reported back to the commission as an information item, and that would be good for us to just hear about the administrative actions that wouldn't come before us. We're still streamlining, but we're just being, made aware.
Yes, and we're also working on a landing page on the website that will show what is currently in review, what is currently under construction, to provide the commission and the public, for that matter, a better understanding of what's going on. So we are looking at deploying that, and then as we get into the zoning code update, there are tools, there are techniques that we could look at that even require ratification, that's a phrase I'll put out there, administrative level decisions that are brought forward for ratification by the Planning Commission. That's something I've seen in other communities, so we can talk through review thresholds and decision-making authority when we get into the zoning code update.
Before we close out commissioner comments, just want to make kudos to, oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to give kudos to Mr. Rocha on doing a very good presentation and staff report.
You want to go first?
No, I thought you were wanting to make a...
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah.
I don't...
So I think sort of in line with what Vice Chair Lee was saying, I have noticed that it ties into cannabis in that they're mainly restricted to the industrial zones. And I know it came up with the previous application we had for the new, where they were taking over an existing lease in a building that already existed. And you had brought up that complex was kind of in disrepair and the signs were falling off and it was not well maintained. And I'm just kind of, I guess, throwing it out there that it seems like if we consolidate a whole bunch of industries in an industrial area that we don't have any expectations on for maintaining the buildings, in a way, they're all kind of, I don't know, they're car places, they're adult businesses, they're cannabis, they're sort of the places no one wants to be near, live by. We try to separate them from housing and residential, which makes sense, but then we're kind of consolidating them all in an area, and I wonder if that contributes to sort of a lack of upkeep of the area. So just something that I've noticed that came up before, and in terms of what you were saying about potentially spreading things around the city a little bit more instead of concentrating them. And then the other thing is I missed that drive-around event that you guys did where you looked at previous projects, and I just wanted to know how that went and if anyone wanted to comment on whether or not it was valuable and if there was any insights that came out of it, since I missed it.
I can lead off on that and just say that from my standpoint, my perspective, it was a very good meeting. I would look forward to doing this again in another year. We'll have another selection of projects to choose from. The interrelationships between the ARC, Planning Commission staff, they were good. This is an opportunity to make them better. And I think as well, it gives insight into outcomes created by specific projects. We did observe problems. We did observe things that we could do differently. And I would say that, we're looking at code enforcement action on at least one of them. But, there's lessons learned that we can carry forward into the zoning code update. Landscape standards, for instance, looking at the quantity, the quality of landscape, better defining shade, how we create shade within parking lots and on projects. I think there's opportunities for us to use this to reflect on how we can do better. And I personally thought it was a great meeting. I appreciate everyone that had the opportunity to participate and invite others on that too.
Great.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as a newbie, just to get a sense of things that have come before the commission that I certainly wasn't aware of, just to get a sense of the issues. So it was useful for me, for sure.
One thing that I noticed that I didn't notice before was at the Denny's on Vistacino, they have very interesting use of the articulation of the expansion joints on the building to provide surface relief. And the way they did it's very interesting. It's worth, next time you pass by there, just taking a look at it, because it does break up the side of the building. Okay, Commissioner comments is done. City Attorney comments,
I don't have anything for you this evening.
okay. Staff comments,
Nothing further.
then I will adjourn the meeting at 7:05. Thank you, everybody.